The ancient Greeks initially didn't understand the value of painting. They focused on striving for accuracy and realism, trying to outdo each other in creating lifelike depictions. Once they organized a competition in the square with a predetermined theme, painting a bunch of grapes. Each painter proudly displayed their canvas for everyone to see. The crowd applauded, amazed at how realistic the paintings were. One painter, full of confidence, presented his depiction of a bunch of grapes. Before anyone could express their admiration, a bird flew over and pecked at the grapes on his canvas, mistaking them for real. Who deserved the laurel wreath? It became clear, didn't it? Was there a need for a referee? The second painter's work was so convincingly realistic that even a bird was fooled. But is this the purpose of painting? No, it is not. Why do we paint? We engage in fiction. I, for one, enjoy fiction. Let's say there's a young person who grew up with their grandmother from a very young age because their parents didn't have time to take care of them, so they entrusted the young person to their grandmother. Under the care and nurturing of their grandmother, the young person gradually grew up. As he grew older, his grandmother grew older too. One day, the grandmother passed away, leaving the young person devastated. In this state of grief, they wanted to express himself. So he turned to their closest friend and shared the sorrow caused by their grandmother's passing, telling his friend about the kind of person his grandmother was, sharing many stories. After listening, the close friend only grasped a general impression. They understood that the young person had such a loving grandmother, who was a very kind-hearted elderly person. That's all the concept they obtained. The young person realized that he had failed. He didn't manage to convey the true essence of his grandmother to their friend, and he couldn't find a way to do so. He suddenly remembered something: he could show his grandmother to his close friend. How could he make it happen? Since he had been obligated by his parents to learn painting since childhood, he had obediently followed their instructions and diligently practiced. Over time, his skills improved, but he never truly understood the purpose behind his artistic pursuits. He regarded it as a task assigned by his parents that he needed to excel at. One day, it struck him, he could use painting to let his close friend see his grandmother. He returned home and set up his canvas in his studio, assuming he was trained in oil painting. For the first time in his life, he began his creation, painting a portrait of his grandmother. He depicted her exactly as she was in that portrait, and then invited his dear friend to his home. This friend entered his studio, and there the canvas stood, displaying his artwork. In an instant, the friend saw his old grandmother, surpassing 1,000 words. I'm not saying that the friend saw an old woman at first glance. Why? Before entering the studio, the friend passed through the living room, where there was a photograph of his grandmother on the wall. When looking at the photograph, the friend merely saw an old woman with white hair. But upon entering the studio and seeing the portrait painted by the young artist, the friend truly saw his grandmother. The contour of her forehead, the expression in her eyes, the smile lines at the corners of her eyes, the curve of her lips, her entire face exuded purity and integrity. Observing her white hair, especially her gaze, what did you see in the portrait of this grandmother? It contained concern, worry, and a sense of integrity. The young artist successfully captured these emotions, allowing his friend to truly see his grandmother and glimpse her spiritual world. The end point of conceptual expression is where art begins. Let's assume that this young person didn't learn to paint but was forced by his parents to play the piano. He eventually achieved a grade 10 level and always saw piano playing as a training imposed upon him by his parents, perhaps as a means to develop his willpower. This time, he suddenly realized that despite all the words spoken, he couldn't make his dear friend see his grandmother. However, he could make his friend hear her. So, this young person returned home and sat in front of the piano. For the first time, he placed a blank sheet of music on the music stand, with a pen by its side. His 10 fingers began to explore the 88 keys, searching for that elusive inspiration. Suddenly, the motive was found, and the musical ideas began to flow. The smallest unit of musical expression is called a motive, or theme, and it emerged. He quickly developed it into a main theme, and once the first theme was established, he searched for a second theme, continuously exploring the piano keys. From the first theme to the second, he added a transitional passage to expand the rich meaning of the first theme. Finally, he completed their first composition, Opus number 1. Should he give it a title or leave it untitled? There are 2 options. One option is to leave it untitled, calling it Piano Sonata in A minor, Opus number 1. Then, he invited his close friend to his home, assuming that this friend had years of experience in listening to music. They played the composition for his friend, and after finishing, he asked, "What did you hear?" The friend responded, "I heard my motherland." This friend's response was absolutely correct. When someone tries to encompass his grandmother's emotions, personality, and spirit within a musical composition, what is he essentially expressing? His motherland. This is one aspect. We grow up gradually under our grandmother's care and nurturing. Our grandmother not only cares about our lives but also our spiritual well-being. Isn't all of this connected to our motherland? Because a title needed to be added, what the friend heard, my motherland, was completely accurate. The term untitled music doesn't mean it lacks content. Of course, they could choose another approach and give it a title, such as, My Grandmother. In any case, he allowed his friend to hear his grandmother, her rich spiritual world, and the connection between her and us. Of course, there is the option of using language through literary creation, which is called writing poetry or prose. In summary, it belongs to art and goes beyond everyday speech and conceptual expression. This is the fundamental principle of art. Why do we need art? Because humans have emotions and a heart. The driving force behind our life experiences in this world is the power of our emotions. It is through the propulsion of emotions that we imagine, intuit, and comprehend. So, where does the power of the spirit lie? Aren't we called spiritual beings? The power of the spirit is emotions, the emotions of our human life. How can these emotions be preserved? It is through the propulsion of emotions that our imagination, intuition, and comprehension are awakened, leading to creation. If we don't harness our imagination, intuition, and comprehension driven by emotions, we cannot create anything, and the purpose of creation is to forever preserve that emotional essence. Beethoven once deeply felt the glory of God and the salvation we receive from Him. In the midst of this ecstatic joy over the glory of God and His salvation, he composed a famous trumpet piece. Years later, when we open the sheet music of Beethoven's trumpet piece and read it, or if you are a trumpet player and can perform it, we once again hear the ecstatic joy that erupted in Beethoven's heart at that time. It returns to us. This is the fundamental principle of art. To further discuss art and truth, we first need to clarify what truth is. Science and truth cannot be equated, although in our current era, they are often treated as interchangeable. Science is equal to truth, no. When we Chinese engage in discussions, you will notice a linguistic habit. If I argue with you and strongly disagree with your viewpoint, how do I conclude? I simply say, your viewpoint is unscientific, and that's the end of it, a verdict is pronounced. What does this mean? By saying your viewpoint is unscientific, it is equating it to lacking truth. The equation of science with truth is made. We say your viewpoint is not the truth, but rather we say it is unscientific, thus equating science with truth. However, they cannot be equated. What is philosophy? It can be summarized as contemplating the relationship between humans and the universe, engaging in rational inquiry to pursue ultimate truths. And what about religion? It can be described in 8 words: humbling oneself before the divine, grasping the intangible. A true religious practitioner, whether Christian or Muslim, first sets aside his ego, completely letting go of the self and placing it on the ground. In the presence of God, we are incredibly humble, and each person carries original sin. This is Christianity. In the presence of Allah, we are also infinitely humble. Every individual's life is part of Allah's plan. It should not be seen as one's own. The realization of one's goals is but a part of Allah's plan. This is what religion is about. Humbling oneself before the divine, grasping the intangible, re-examining one's attachment to the worldly life. Then, through devotion, we dedicate ourselves to God or to Allah. This is called religion, one of the highest spiritual activities. As for art, let's describe it in 6 words: cultivating emotions to elevate one's nature. Our life practices are all practices of emotions, and these emotions need to be elevated. Their realm need to be refined, and needs to ascend to a higher level. Very low emotions are greed, anger, and obsession, so those need to be sublimated, right? Isn't Buddhism teaching us to cultivate and practice? Cultivation and practice is precisely the sublimation of emotions, transforming greed, anger, and obsession into morality, meditation, and wisdom. These emotions need to be refined. Comprehending one's destiny, while practice is a path, art is also a path. So, when it comes to artistic creation, we just discussed its primary principle. It is to preserve our vivid, powerful, and vibrant emotions, allowing them to be forever preserved so that future generations can continuously draw upon them. That is the primary principle. What is the fundamental goal of art? To comprehend truth, to understand destiny, to grasp truth. How can truth be associated with art? When we think of truth, we often think of science and theory, the truth of theories, the truth of philosophy. What is the difference between the truth in art and these other domains? Let us discuss it in a more concrete manner. For example, let me give you an example. Rongbao Zhai, the auction house, has a branch in Shanghai, and I am good friends with the general manager of the Shanghai branch. One day, he called me and said that he had 8 masterpieces of Chinese modern painting, genuine works, in his possession. He asked if I would like to come and see them, and I eagerly agreed, looking forward to a visual feast. That evening, I went to his office, excited to see the artworks. They were all traditional Chinese ink paintings by renowned artists from modern Chinese art history. Of course, he didn't tell me the names of the artists at first and asked me not to look at the signatures for now. He wanted me to take a look and then answer some questions. I carefully examined each artwork, and when I finished, he asked me which ones I thought had the highest value. Later, I told him that out of the 8 artworks, only 2 had true artistic value, while the others were well painted but lacked high value. He asked me which ones I thought had low value, and I pointed out the other 6. He chuckled and said, "You think those have low value? Let me tell you, those 2 artworks you mentioned as having high value were sold at auction for much lower prices than the other 6. I replied, "You are talking about commercial value, but I am talking about artistic value. These are 2 different things." If we talk about a famous painting, a piece of artwork, and its value is high during an auction, what are the main reasons for it? I can provide 3 factors, although I'm not an expert like you. Firstly, the artist should be deceased. They can't be alive because if they were, there would be more works coming from them. So, the first factor is that the artist must be deceased. Secondly, they should have a prominent reputation that is widely recognized by the public. And thirdly, their works should have limited circulation among the general public, meaning they are rarely found in the public domain. This scarcity contributes to their value. Some artists produce a large volume of work during their lifetime, and many people collect their pieces. However, the artist we are referring to intentionally kept their works from circulating widely among the public. So, in summary, the three factors are the artist's death, their significant reputation, and the limited circulation of their works among the public. These factors contribute to the increased price, which is known as commercial value and is unrelated to artistic value. He became curious and enthusiastic. He asked if I could explain how artistic value is determined. I initially told him that to understand this, he would need to come to Fudan University and attend at least 2 semesters of classes, and even then, he might not fully grasp it. However, considering that we are good friends, I thought we could give it a try. In short, I told him that I teach a course called Philosophy of Art at Fudan University, but he didn't need to attend the course because it would take too much of his time. Instead, I decided to give him a simplified explanation. I told him that it's quite simple. When we stand in front of any painting, we naturally pause to observe it. At that moment, the artwork becomes the object of our observation, and we become the subject observing it, right? The subject faces the object. If, as I continue to look at the painting, I find myself mentally entering into it, if it allows me to step into its world, then I consider it to possess true artistic value. On the other hand, there are other artworks that, no matter how long I stand in front of them, always remain mere objects before me. I can never enter into them. Perhaps they are beautifully painted, with excellent use of color, smooth lines, rhythm, and pleasing aesthetics that satisfy our usual taste. They conform to our aesthetic preferences, and they are exquisite. However, in reality, you can't mentally enter into them. They don't create a world that you can step into. Such artworks have extremely limited artistic value. These artworks may lack flaws, indicating the artist's profound skills, but the artist has not created a truly remarkable piece. A genuine artwork is a world in itself, and you don't perceive it as an object. Rather, you inherently belong in it, you are already within it. So, what is this world? We often perceive the world as the objects we know, which we call the objective world. However, an artwork does not present us with an objective world. Instead, it offers us a world of existence, life world, because you would enter into it and explore it as a living being. It is not merely an object in front of you. Some works will always remain your object, part of the objective world, and not art in the true sense. I shared these thoughts with him, and his eyes sparkled with excitement. He immediately mentioned that he had an excellent bottle of wine, a famous French wine, and poured it for us. I said, of course, 1 glass each, and we drank the wine, entering into that world. Therefore, there are 2 ways to understand the world. One is the objectified world we cognitively perceive, where our purpose is to gain knowledge and seek benefits while avoiding harm. Science is the most helpful in this regard, as it enables us to pursue benefits and avoid harm. But there is another way to understand the world. We have always existed within it, being born into it, experiencing blessings or punishments, and harboring hopes or despair. This is the life world, and we inherently belong in it. Artworks should allow us to see this kind of world. Why can we step into the world that art presents us with? Because we inherently belong in that world. Let me give you an example. Earlier, I mentioned 2 paintings that have artistic value, and he told me they were by Qi Baishe. When I looked at the signature, I realized that Qi Baishe was already in his 90s when he created those works. Do you know what is depicted in those paintings? A pumpkin and a cluster of bean pods, Just these two things. Why did I find myself stepping into that world as I looked at them? It's a still life painting, right? Of course, it's an ink wash still life, featuring a pumpkin and a cluster of bean pods. But as I kept looking, I found that I had returned to my childhood, to the scenes and feelings of my childhood, to the way I had perceived the world and the things around me. It was a long-lost connection. This painting contained the world we once experienced in our childhood, the life world that was our childhood. It had been so long. This painting allowed me to enter and return to that world. The emotions I felt at that moment were beyond words. We have strayed so far from our childhood innocence, and when we once again feel that return to our childhood selves, we could clearly see ourselves as we are now.